Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 305, and today's date is March 4th, 2014, and the title of this episode is Intel Report, Iran and Russia Might Combine Forces to Launch Cyber Attacks on the U.S. Economy. Now, we've been hearing this a lot. This is actually the third time that I've been hearing that something could disrupt the economy of the United States, and they're continually using this propaganda over and over now, and this is all being done for the buildup of the cyber attack here in the United States, because what they're going to do is they're going to bring down the financial institutions, because the Fed, the United States government, will not be blamed for this economic collapse. They are out there, I'm talking about the President, the Fed, all telling us and the world, with the other private Western central bank nations, that we are in this fabulous recovery. Everything is okay. And they are continually telling us that the housing is rebounding, retail sales are fantastic, everyone has a job, everyone's getting work, there are no problems here. But we see it completely differently, and we know what they are preparing and what they are ready to do. They are making everyone believe that they have fixed the problem. They have not. And when I say they, I'm talking about the central bankers, the U.S. government, the elite, the globalists, whatever you like to call them. They have not fixed anything. All they did was prop it up and make everyone believe that the economy is now in a recovery. But what they're going to do is they're going to use some type of false flag event and then blame this on another country. Now, what that country is going to be, we don't exactly know, but we can make some determinations by what they have been doing and saying and what we have been seeing. We know they've been pushing the Syrian electronic army at us. We know they've been pushing Iran, the Al-Qasim cyber attackers at us. We know they've been telling us cyber attacks have been coming from Russia and China and North Korea, and all of this it plays into what's going to happen. And this is what we are seeing at this point. They are preparing for this event because this economy cannot be sustained, because you can see what's happening. The United States, with the central bankers and the private Western central bank countries, are all fighting to keep this system going. And by doing this, what they need to do is they need to invade and keep all of these countries in check. And I'm talking about Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Thailand, in Africa, Sudan, Central Africa, Mali. We can see this is what they are doing, and they are losing the battle in many of these places. And if we look at Iraq, they are losing footing in Iraq. If we look at Libya, they are losing footing in Libya. The Ukraine is not going the way they wanted it to go. They are losing footing in the Ukraine. So again, they understand what is happening. They understand that the dollar cannot continually to operate the way it is, and they understand that the yuan is now being slated as the reserve currency, and they will not let this happen. They rather start a war and hold a false flag before they allow another currency be the reserve currency of the world. And this is what is happening. But let's get into the economic collapse news, and we'll lead up to why Iran and Russia might be combining forces to bring down the U.S. economy. Now, out in Cyprus, what is happening is they tried to pass a privatization bill, and that kind of failed, and they didn't pass it. But just now, the parliament passed the critical bill for their bailout, and they did this on Tuesday. 30 politicians in the 56-member parliament endorsed a guideline for asset sales. Cyprus must raise $1.93 billion from privatizations as condition of the bailout, or rescue money will not be distributed. So again, they're going to be selling the assets of the country. Again, here are the central bankers. They're looting the country. This is what they want. They want to go into these countries, loot the country, and give them paper and ink. And again, They're going to ratchet up and continually give Cyprus more and more debt, just like they have done with Greece, and this is not going to help because they have huge unemployment problem. They're going to have huge interest payments. They're going to need more debt. They're going to need more austerity, and again, they're going to end up like Greece. They're going to end up like Spain. They're going to end up like Italy. It will not work because this cannot be sustained. And we have to remember, in Cyprus, they still have capital controls on the people. They have not relieved the amount of money that the people can withdraw from their accounts. Yes, they can transfer a little bit more from bank to bank, but if someone went in there, they cannot go up there and say, listen, I'd like my $100,000. They are just not allowed to do that at this point. And we're already into March of 2014, so we're moving over a year now of capital controls. And we have to remember, they told us that capital controls would only be like, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, maybe 3 months. All right, now it's over a year. And again, they started out with the bail-in saying that we're only going to take 8 to 10%, and they ended up taking 47%. And this is what we're going to see here in the U.S. and in other countries like Canada, Australia, the Eurozone, Switzerland, because they all have the same bail-in document. These were created on purpose because they understand when this collapse comes, the governments will no longer bail out these banks. So they need to look inward and take the money from the people. And this is why everyone that is in a bank is no longer a depositor. They are now a creditor. Look at your terms of service of these banks. And you will also see they added other terms in there where they are not responsible or can be held liable for cyber attacks, war, false flag events, and those type of things. And if you really look at their terms of service and read it, you can't hold the officers, the employees of the bank. You just lose your money, and that is it. And if you're depending on the FDIC does not have enough money to cover every single bank when this bail-in comes. It's just impossible. They cannot do it. Okay, now in the news they're saying that auto loans amounts hit a new record high, and they're like, "Whoa, look, auto sales it's getting better. We're loaning people more money." But if we really break this down and see what's happening, it's really not what they're saying. Those with non-prime credit ratings or credit scores between 620 and 679 had the highest average auto loan because, as your credit is not as good as someone else's and you have a credit score between 620 and 679, you have to pay more money. And not surprisingly, those with subprime credit ratings, credit scores between 550 and 619, had the highest average monthly payments. And this is what has been happening because they opened up the auto industry to subprime borrowers because they needed more people to purchase the automobiles. And of course, these people are paying more money per month, and what happens is it drives up the amount of auto loans. And that's all we're seeing right now. And again, for people to afford these cars, they have extended the auto loans from I remember when they were 4 years, then 5 years. We're up to 7 to 8 years now. They have extended them so long because people cannot afford these high-priced automobiles, especially on the incomes that everyone is making. And again, income has not kept up with inflation, even though the government tells us there is no inflation, but we see it everywhere. Income has actually been falling. Those people who have had a full-time job making a certain income got laid off, now look for another full-time job. They are making less money, or those people are making less money in 1, 2, or 3 part-time jobs, and they need an automobile to get to work. They have to pay these higher payments because they cannot afford these cars, and they need to stretch out the loans for a longer period so their payments are lower, but in the end they're actually paying more money. Now they keep telling us that the economy is getting better, everything looks great, but there are more and more store closing being thrown at us, and we are seeing that 145 Brown Shoes, which is a famous footwear, they're closing 145 stores. Target is closing 12 more stores, and this is because the economy is recovering and we're doing better. No, it's not. It's because the people do not have the money to shop in retail. They just don't have the money. Radio Shack is closing another 1,100 stores. First there was 500, now they're closing an additional 1,100. Why? Because people are not going into Radio Shack and purchasing goods. That is the reason. And of course, this goes on to say Radio Shack plans to close up to 1,100 of its underperforming stores in the U.S. and reported a wider loss for its fourth quarter as traffic slowed during the critical holiday season. And we saw this in Macy's, JCPenney, Best Buy, and many other stores where they did not see the traffic. They started to close the stores. They're laying off many people, and this is because people are not really working. And again, I've said this many times, we have to use common sense. If the unemployment rate is truly at 6.6%, and watch, we'll probably see it drop even further, why is retail doing worse now than when unemployment was much, much higher? Because if we go back to 2012 and 2011, unemployment was not at 6.6%. Unemployment was at 8% or higher. So how can retail be doing worse? Because the unemployment numbers are completely made up. They are manipulated. And if you go back to 1994, prior to 1994, and you don't use the manipulated numbers, you can see unemployment is around 30%. And again, there are other people that are saying it's around 37%, but it is very high. And again, the youth of America who are coming out of college cannot find the jobs they went to school for. So what is happening? They're staying with their parents, they're living in their rooms, they're getting part-time work, and they don't have extra money. Why? Because their student loan payments are too high. And again, this is why the government is out there saying, listen, we're going to redo your student loans. We're going to make it a lot easier to make payments, because they realize these students don't have the jobs to repay these loans, and this is why they're stretching them out and making special circumstances where they do not have to pay these student loans. And again, the youth of America is the driving force for the next generation, and right now we do not have that driving force for retail. We do not have that driving force for real estate, because those people who are retiring are looking to sell their homes, move into a smaller place, or rent. And they do not want to own their home anymore. And again, we don't have that youth to come up behind them and to purchase all of these homes. And this is why we're seeing an increase of foreclosures. This is why mortgage applications are starting to plunge. And there are many other reasons, but this is really leading into this. And again, going back to the retail sales, Sbarro, which is a pizza chain, they're closing about 155 of its 400 stores in North America. And what they're saying is that the economy has affected their business. And again, when the economy has affected the food industry, we're in trouble, because that means people are not going out to eat. And again, this was not expensive food, and this means people don't even have money to pay for pizza. Now, we are seeing right now in the real estate industry, we said this back in August, September, October of 2013, when we saw President Obama out there saying that, the housing market is recovering. But, if we look past that, we saw Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, J.P. Morgan, Chase, 1-800 East Coast West Mortgages, all laying off thousands upon thousands of people in the mortgage departments, because they understood that this is a complete bubble. And we understand that most of the purchases of the homes are in cash. And right now, loan originations declined to the lowest point since November of 2008. And this was November. That was the start of the recession. I mean, this is down 60%. Home equity lending in 2013, still down over 90% from 2006. These declines are largely tied to the increased mortgage interest rate environment, which is having a significant impact on the number of borrowers with incentive to refinance. Now, you're telling me the interest rates are what, around 4% or something like that, and they tick up a little bit and no one's refinancing? I mean, the interest rates are very low at this point. So what's really happening? Well, what they're seeing is that a good deal of this decline can be attributed to the fact that a majority of those who could refinance at historically low rates in recent years already have. So those people who were going to refinance have already refinanced because the rates are very low. Again, when they talk about ticking up, we're not going to 8%, 7%, 9%. We're at very historically low interest rates right now. Again, the youth of America and those people who actually have work and those people who didn't foreclose and those people who had short sales, all of these people cannot purchase homes, even though they're trying to tell us that it's a boomerang buyer effect where all these people who had short sales and foreclosures are going to come back into the market. No, they're not. There's a reason why they had foreclosures. It's because they couldn't make ends meet. They lost their job. They had to get out of their high mortgage houses because they didn't have the income to support them. And right now, these people are just trying to get by day to day, and this is why the Fed is still purchasing the toxic real estate and the treasuries through quantitative easing. Yes, they have reduced the amount, but they are still purchasing them. And this is this is a complete ruse, because what they are planning to do is to show that the economy is recovering, and all of a sudden we're going to see an event and they're going to have to kick up QE, and this is what we're going to see. Now, of course, Obama is out there, and he's introducing a $3.9 trillion budget, and he has a couple of predictions for you all. And what he's saying is that Obama predicts fastest GDP growth this year since 2005. Well, right now, I can tell you right now, they kept on revising GDP, manipulating GDP. They went all the way back to 1929 to include research and development, so GDP was in the positive range, but really, GDP is actually in the negative range. Obama says that the economy is moving forward. Housing is coming back. Well, I think we know better. We know that housing is not coming back. Home sales are plunging. Loan originations are plunging. People are not buying the homes. Most of the houses that are being purchased are being done in cash. And these hedge funds and investment companies are trying to unload them at this point. And Obama says he's encouraging all the industry and everything to come together and really push this forward because the recovery is here. And we know this is all propaganda. And every time the government has to come out there and tell you each one of these things, that the economy is recovering, we know it is fake, because if an economy is actually recovering, you feel it. And how do you feel it? Well, you look around, you say, you know what? Wow, look at all these new stores opening. Wow, I just got a great job making a great income. Wow, more and more housing developments are going up, and you know what? I can't even get into them because that's how busy it is. They don't need 100% financing to sell the homes. They don't need ARMs. They don't have to sell the autos to subprime buyers. They don't have to channel stuff into the dealerships and then promote it with incentives just to get rid of the automobiles. You would feel it. You would know it. And they don't have to convince you of it because you'd be living it. This is how you know this is all propaganda. Okay, now the U.S. government just published by Attorney General Eric Holder on February 27th, the Obama administration granted itself unprecedented powers to spy on and prosecute journalists. The new policy announcement directly violates, of course, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which provides the Congress shall make no law abridging the freedoms of speech or the press. But again, they passed this law. The power of the Attorney General to use certain law enforcement tools, including subpoenas, court orders, and search warrants to seek information from or records of non-consenting members of the news media is greatly expanded at this point. And we talked about this, how the government is trying to chip away at the rights of the people. They're trying to remove the Constitution. They don't want it there. And this is why they're going after the Second Amendment. This is why they've been implementing all these free speech regulations, because they are trying to get rid of it. Under this requirement, officials from the executive branch will visit journalists in their homes and workplaces and bully them into handing over communications and work product under threat of prosecution and subpoena. The order also carves out a rule of general exception in cases related to national security. Now, they always play the national security card. They always do this because, if this has to do with national security, again, they don't need proof. They don't need to tell you how this affects national security. All they have to do is mention national security. Any requirements that the government give notice to journalists before it violates their First and Fourth Amendment, banning unreasonable searches and seizures rights, does not apply where the journalist is or is reasonably likely to be committing or attempting to commit a crime of terrorism or is aiding, abetting, or conspiring in illegal activity relating to terrorism. So guess what? Just like the NDAA, the government can now say, you know what? This has to do with national security. It has to do something with terrorism. We need to see all of your notes. We need all of your information. And again, the government need not show probable cause in order to obtain the content of the private communication of the journalist. It need only offer specific and facts showing that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the contents of a wire or electronic communication or the records or other information sought are relevant and material to an ongoing criminal investigation. So here they are removing every single right. And this is going to move down to the everyday person, just like every law they create. They always start with a certain group, and I'll give you an example, like taxes. They only say they're going to tax the rich, and of course this then moves to the middle class, then moves to the poor, and this is how they do it incrementally. Again, they are doing it incrementally, and this is how they do things. And again, they are trying to remove every single person's rights. They don't want you to have rights because it'll make it easier for them when the collapse comes. Now, we understand that CISPA is still pending in the Senate, and that allows the corporations to share information with the government. And we understand the president was out there and he created the executive orders for his new framework of voluntarily sharing information from companies to the government to ward off these cyber attacks that we've been seeing, to ward off all these attacks on the financial institutions, on Adobe, on Yahoo, on Google, to the University of Maryland, to the University of Illinois, to PayPal, to eBay. And we've been seeing a lot of this stuff. And all of a sudden, they've come out with the framework and the executive orders. Well, and again, we have to remember they do this incrementally because they want to pass a law. They want to pass CISPA and make it mandatory and take over the entire internet. This is their plan, and they do it very slowly. They put everything in place, and then boom, the false flag event occurs. They just so happen to have CISPA pending in the Senate, and I believe we should pass it. So what has happened up to this point? Department of Homeland Security is rolling out a plan to offer states and territorial government organizations a set of free managed security services, including intrusion detection and prevention, net flow analysis, and firewall monitoring. The services will be provided by the Center for Internet Security Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. The plan is part of a multi-pronged effort to boost government threat information sharing and cooperation called for in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. So they are putting all of this in place. DHS this February launched the Critical Infrastructure Cyber Community Voluntary Program, which will help coordinate critical infrastructure operations. And again, they are putting all of this into place. Now, DHS has their piece into place, the executive orders are in place, we have the law pending, and all of a sudden you will see some event and they'll say enough is enough. We need a way to stop these cyber attacks and we need to pass these laws. And this is how they approach everything. Now, we understand that the U.S., the central bankers, are all across the globe trying to keep the empire and the central bankers in power using the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. And this is what they're trying to do. But they are losing in certain areas, and they're trying to keep control in others. In Thailand right now, we understand the government of Thailand is a puppet government controlled by the central bankers and the U.S. government. And of course, those people who are rising up, who want to replace the government, they are not allowed. And what's happening there is they might declare another state of emergency, and it could be extended into the areas because of violence that is happening, because the people are rising up. And again, in Thailand, the central bankers, the Western governments, United States government, does not want to remove the puppet government from power. They do not want them to be removed by the people. So what they do is they declare martial law, they send the police out, they start beating people, and this is what you're seeing in Thailand right now. Now, in Libya, the United States government, the central bankers, of course, they invaded Libya, they threw out the government, they put in a puppet regime, and now they are losing control. And what has happened is the Libya parliament moved into a 5-star Tripoli hotel Monday, a day after rioters armed with knives and guns stormed the legislature because the militia in Libya has been taking over the country again and pushing out the puppet regime that is there. And now they don't even have the Libya parliament. They had to go to a hotel. And again, the militia keeps saying, you need to resign, you need to get out. We are taking over this country. And again, the central bankers are worried about this. The U.S. government are very worried about this, because if they decide to put the natural resources like oil in the country on a different currency than the U.S. dollar, and they decide to remove the private Western Central Bank, we are going to see something happen. Now, can they make the case that they have to invade Libya again? That's going to be a tough one. But they might do other things in Libya, and we'll have to watch this closely and see how this turns out. Now, Iran and Russia are looking to improve their relations, and the formation of the Hassan Rouhani government marked a new chapter in Iranian and Russian relations. Business circles on both sides are eager to establish new ties, but they are running into difficulties caused by the international sanctions. So Iran really wants to join up with Russia. They want to start trading, selling their oil, selling military assets back and forth, but they're having a problem with the sanctions that are imposed right now. And again, the central bankers, the U.S. government, do not want Russia in there, just like they don't want Russia in Syria, who made a deal with Syria for helping them with their infrastructure in the natural gas and oil, and making a deal that they would purchase their natural gas and oil from Syria for like the next 25 years or so. And they definitely do not want this to happen. So again, we're going to see a lot of propaganda come out, and we can see why the United States, the central bankers, are in Ukraine, because they're trying to push Russia, demonize Russia, and make Russia seem like they are the enemy at this point. And again, we see a lot of propaganda out there. We see on CNN that Putin seems to have, and this is President Obama saying this, Putin seems to have a different set of lawyers. President Obama has a strong belief that the Russian incursion is illegal. Now, of course, he said belief, because the Russian invasion, there is no Russian invasion, and it is legal. And again, they leave out a lot of the important parts. Now, the Ukrainians out there, and especially in Kiev, their statement that the UN that Russia has 16,000 soldiers have been deployed to Crimea has caused a frenzy among Western media, and they're reporting out there that there's 16,000 troops, they're invading Crimea, and oh my God, look what's happening. And of course, we're seeing all these headlines on Fox, we're seeing it on CNN, we're seeing it all over the place. And of course, what is really happening in Crimea is that the Western media seems they have chosen to ignore the fact that the Russian troops have been stationed in Crimea for over a decade. And they also kind of left out that the deal surrounding the Black Sea Fleet allows Russia to station a contingent of up to 25,000 troops in the Ukraine. And according to the initial agreement, the Russian Black Sea Fleet was to stay in Crimea until 2017, but the deal was later prolonged for another 25 years. So these troops are stationed there. They didn't invade, and they aren't really doing anything. They're just maintaining the peace. And again, we have to look at the whole entire situation. What has happened there is that the U.S. government, along with the central bankers and the EU, decided to pay agent provocateurs, and they spent quite a bit of money to push this agenda forward. Now, the opposition and the Ukrainian government at the time, what happened was they came up with this deal. They both signed it. Germany, France, and the U.S. approved it. And then all of a sudden the opposition went back on the deal, went into the government, and threw them out. And everyone escaped, and they took over. And they didn't have elections. They decided, okay, let's put in a prime minister, which is a millionaire central banker. And if you look at many of the offices of the country, they are central bankers. They are millionaires. They're all businessmen because they're taking over the country because they want this country joined up with the EU and eventually joined with NATO. And this is what we are seeing right now. And of course, all the propaganda has to come out that Russia's making their move. They want to bring back the Soviet Union. No, that's not what they're doing. They are trying, and Putin is trying, to bring the armed forces, the people of Ukraine, over to Crimea, and he's giving amnesty. He's telling everyone, if he understands your decision, if you don't come over to Crimea, but if you'd like to come over to Crimea, you can. And a lot of the people have been saying, okay, we're no longer with Kiev, we're coming over. A lot of the armed forces, a lot of the Navy has come over, Air Force has come over, and we're seeing a lot of this. And right now in Crimea, things look like they're coming back to normal. The capital of Crimea gradually comes back to normal as its residents resume their daily life there. Now, Crimea is looking to create its own defense ministry. The newly appointed leader of Crimea in southern Ukraine said Tuesday that the region is to form its own defense ministry. Local security forces, including the police and army, which previously were commanded from Kiev, will be brought under the regional government control of Crimea now. Now, here in the U.S., the Major General Bob Scales said, you know what, we just need to write off Crimea right now. The United States needs to write Crimea off after the invasion, which there was none, of Russian troops following last month's Ukrainian uprising. They are now part of Russia. Paint them red. They have been reintegrated into the Russian Republic, and there is absolutely nothing that we can do about it. And this is coming from Scales, a retired Army Major General. Now, of course, Kerry is out there, and he is saying that they're going to impose sanctions on Russia. We're going to freeze assets. But we really have to take a look at the trade of Russia and the United States, and if these sanctions are actually really going to do anything. U.S. lawmakers, they're threatening that Russia with economic sanctions over this entire crisis. But let's take a look at this. The net trade between Russia and the U.S. was about $38.1 billion in 2013. The U.S. exported $11.26 billion to Russia and imported $26.96 billion worth of goods. Russia exports more than $19 billion of oil and petroleum products to the United States, as well as $1 billion in fertilizer products. Russia is going to be cut off from the world. This is very unlikely, given that Russia provides to the world oil, gas, and raw materials. So I don't think this is actually going to happen. And we also have to remember that there are major companies that American companies that are in Russia. And if we look at this, we see Boeing, Ford, General Motors, ExxonMobil, to name a few, all have huge presence in the Russian market. Boeing's investment in Russia is deep, as the aerospace carrier sources a considerable amount of steel, titanium, and aircraft parts from Russian companies. Boeing receives about 35% of its titanium from state-owned Rostec. And Ford has sold over 1 million automobiles in Russia in 2013, sold 105,000 cars. GM, which has 9% market share, sold about 250,000. Both companies have shifted production plants from Europe to Russia. So if the United States government imposes sanctions, it will most likely hurt America more so than Russia. And we have to remember this, that Russia and China hold a lot of treasuries. And of course, the Russian presidential advisor, Sergei Glazyev, was out there and he said, we hold a decent amount of treasury bonds, more than 200 billion, and if the United States dares to freeze accounts of Russian businesses and citizens, we can no longer view America as a reliable partner. He said, we will encourage everybody, including China, to dump U.S. treasury bonds, get rid of dollars as an unreliable currency, and leave the U.S. market. If this happened, which I don't believe at this time it will, but if it did, this would bring the U.S. economy to its knees. The Fed would have to increase quantitative easing like you've never seen before to purchase all of these treasury bonds. Because you have to remember, China holds between 1.2 and 1.3 billion trillion dollars worth of treasury bonds, and Russia holds about 200 billion. So this would be really, really horrific for the United States. And again, most of this is because they are using propaganda, and of course they always say sanctions, because they're trying anything they possibly can at this point because they do not like what is happening in Russia. They thought they were just going to go in, take over Kiev, and they thought they would have the entire Ukraine and everyone would be happy. But most of Ukraine is not happy, and we can see that most of the people there are not really interested in the EU or what the Western governments want you to believe. And we can see that it is a oppositional force. We can see they were paid. We can see this was all completely planned from all the evidence that we've seen. And we've seen this all before back in Syria with the false flag. And we've seen the U.S. government and the central bankers and other private Western central bank countries do this to many other countries. I mean, listen, Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, Lebanon, Libya, Yemen. I mean, we've seen this before. This is nothing new. Now, of course, there's propaganda out there, and I mentioned this a couple of reports ago, and it's resurfacing that U.S. intelligence is tracking movements of Russian commandos near Ukraine. And again, earlier this week, they said that they were tracking people, and they're seeing that U.S. intelligence agencies also are tracking possible covert infiltration of Russian commandos. One concern, and this is the concern they have, is that Moscow will provoke a conflict by using the undercover commandos to attack ethnic Russians and then launch an invasion under the guise of protecting those Russians. Well, I really don't think this is going to happen. I believe this is all propaganda. Maybe the opposition forces will do this to make it look like it's coming from Russia, but there is absolutely no reason for Russia to do this at this point because most of the Navy, the armed forces, the people are siding with Crimea at this time, and there is absolutely no reason for this. And we already had a retired Army general saying, let's just write off Crimea, because they realize they're not winning this fight at this time. Now, there is other propaganda out there, and Ukraine and Kiev is saying that, and this is coming from Reuters, reports that Ukraine's telecommunication systems has come under attack in the past 2 days. The head of Ukraine's security service confirms that the IP telephonic attack is underway on mobile phones of members of Ukrainian parliament for the second day in a row. And they're saying that they're being cyber attacked by Russia. They're building up the propaganda. And of course, here in the U.S., we have more propaganda, and former Intel Committee's head, Iran now a world-class cyber threat, and Russia might help Iran with some type of an attack. Iran has emerged as a leading cyber threat and has already hacked into the U.S. defense establishments and financial institutions, likely with the help of Russians. According to a former chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Iran has boosted its cyber capabilities in a surprisingly short amount of time and possesses the ability to launch successful cyber attacks on American financial markets and its infrastructure. The Iranian regime emergence as a world-class cyber threat likely has to do with its close ties to Russia. See how they're playing this up. They're playing this up for a false flag. So what do we have and what do we see now? We have Iran and Russia combining their forces, their cyber forces, to hit the infrastructure, power grid, water supplies, to hit financial institutions to bring down the economy. The other side, they have Syria with the Syrian Electronic Army that is ready to hit CENTCOM, that's been hitting other targets in the United States. So they're making sure that we understand that it could be any one of these that will bring down the U.S. economy. As Russia continues to take an aggressive stance toward the United States, its assistance to Iran's cyber program will grow exponentially as Iran continues to develop offensive and defensive capabilities. Iran's cyber capabilities have become increasingly sophisticated, though the United States remains underprepared to respond to these threats. The cyber threat is real, and it is worrisome. With Iran and Russia combining their resources, a joint cyber attack in the United States could be devastating, and the economy could collapse because of this. You would see something that would cause economic disruption as well as an attack potentially against our infrastructure. And the scary thing is they have the capability to do that, and we don't necessarily have the means to defend it, and they can do this at any time. Now remember, in the beginning of this report, maybe in the middle, I mentioned that Iran and Russia are becoming stronger with each other. They're looking to do trade. They're looking to make deals. They're looking to work together. And all of a sudden we see this Iran-Russia propaganda out there, because what they are preparing for, and they understand this, that this economy cannot last the way it is right now. And they get this. They understand. They understand they didn't get the entire Ukraine. They understand that Libya is falling apart. All of this cannot be held together. The empire of the U.S. is struggling right now, and they realize as they continually remove and they taper the QE, things are going to get worse in the economy. And they're doing this on purpose, and this is why the president's out there talking about recovery. This is why they're showing you tapering, because they're building it up to show that we are recovering, and all of a sudden, just as we were ready to recover completely, all of a sudden we were hit by a cyber attack. It hit our financial institutions. It brought down the power grid. We are now in the dark. We will blame this on Iran, Russia, Syria, North Korea, China, whatever country they believe they need to use at this time. And this is why we've been telling everyone to prepare. This is why we've been telling everyone to get as much as they possibly can out of the banks, because when this hits, what's going to happen is they're going to declare a bank holiday. You're going to see bail-ins. You're going to see the banks freeze everyone's accounts, will be under capital controls, just like Cyprus. They've already created the bail-in documents, and they will use them. The lights will go out, and this is why you need other supplies to be prepared for this. And this is what we are leading up to. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.